Have you ever wondered what it was like to venture to the edge of the world, through submerged mountains, savage winds that roared like beasts, and seas that shifted moods every hour? With no map and no certainty, it was only the creaking wood, the biting cold, and the fragile hope that something lay beyond the darkness. Today, we journey into frozen paths, fiery legends, and forgotten giants in the southernmost reaches where flames would blaze into view and vanish, as though they'd never existed. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan sought a hidden passage to link the Atlantic and Pacific, a secret shortcut through unknown seas. At the southern tip of South America, sailors believed a natural fissure lay between Man and Nith, an unmapped void feared even by seasoned navigators. Magellan did find it, but at great cost. What we now call the Strait of Magellan was then a labyrinth of ice and treacherous waters, narrow, rocky, shrouded in fog, with howling winds that shifted without warning. The currents were equally deceptive, driving ships toward hidden reefs and sending sailors to despair. Of the 5 vessels that set sail from Spain with Magellan, only one returned years later and without its captain. One ship was claimed by the waters, another deserted and fled back to Europe. The remaining vessels endured weeks of sluggish movement, hunger, disease, and death. Men fell ill, provisions rotted, water turned foul. Scurvy bloated their bodies, teeth fell out, and skin became weeping sores. Each dawn brought another soul cast into the sea. Some succumbed to madness, others retreated into silence. Uprisings erupted. Defying captains, winds, even god rebels were executed, hanged on deck, or abandoned to the waves. The cold bit into their bones. Darkness spread early, and the eerie hush of the strait seemed to whisper a singular truth. No man should tread here. This was the very end of the known world, where the sea closed upon the dead and land hid beneath ice and mist. Yet Magellan pressed on, steering his crew beyond the barrier between oceans. But he, himself, would never complete the voyage, falling far later. On distant shores, the strait entered history as a testament to courage and madness, conquest and sacrifice. Even today, it carries the weight of blood, fire, and storms. Here, the sea grants no mercy and the land offers no refuge. But further south, dangers took an unexpected new form. Beyond the treacherous waters, seafarers encountered something unsettling, not of water, but light. South of the strait, small flickering flames pierced the darkness on distant hillsides. Torches, dancing in the night. These lights named the region Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. By day, the embers vanished, but by night, isolated bonfires appeared all along the coast, on remote hills, flickering like eyes watching from the dark. Aboard the ships, weakened and hungry, men shuffled below deck in silence. Through the mist, they glimpsed these lights and wondered what creatures dwelled nearby. Unknown to them, these flames came from the Yamana and Selknam peoples' indigenous groups, igniting fires against bitter cold and to honor their sacred ceremonies. But the Europeans did not understand, and what they failed to understand, they fear. They encountered people smeared in ash, decorated with red, white, and black paint, beings that seemed to emerge from another realm. Around the fires they danced, shouted, and chanted strange hymns. Smoke curled into the heavy sky as if summoning something beyond the clouds. In their fever, exhaustion, and terror, sailors began to see more than eyes could find. Many swore these were no longer humans, but fiery spirit sentinels of the world's edge. Unofficial tales spoke of figures glimpsed near the coast, only to vanish when approached, mere phantoms guarding the threshold of the unknown. Some claimed the fires lit themselves, flaring up in the night with no soul in sight. Others swore they'd seen footprints scorched into the ground, leading nowhere, beginning abruptly and vanishing just as suddenly. It was all too easy to believe that this land had been cursed. Tierra del Fuego, a simple name, but one that sounded ripped from an ancient prophecy or a feverish nightmare. To the native peoples, fire meant shelter, sacred language, and communion with the spirits of their ancestors. But to the Europeans, it was a symbol of intrusion, danger, and something they couldn't explain: sorcery. From the decks of their creaking ships, they looked ashore and saw not comfort, but warnings. Thus the legend grew. It spread through whispers in the ports, in the fragmented reports of those few who made it back alive, in maps drawn in haste and marked with ominous signs. Cartographers would soon outline the southern coast with cautious symbols, and explorers began to avoid its edges, afraid of what they might meet there. Even centuries later, the tales endured. The land of fire was no longer just a place. It became a threshold, the thin line between what could be known and what remained inexplicable. A domain where flame didn't warm, it watched. And for many, even now, those fires were never just fire. They were living presences, ancient and deadly. If the south blazed with flames and riddles, the north whispered a myth of a different nature, older still, stranger, harder to believe. In the frozen plains to the north, between silent valleys and the breath of relentless winds, stories began to emerge of giants, towering men, twice the height of a European, with enormous feet, immense strength, and deep-set eyes that seemed to carry the memory of millennia. The most famous account came from Antonio Pigafetta, chronicler of Magellan's expedition. He wrote of a figure spotted along a beach near the anchorage. A lone man, so tall that he reached the waist of the tallest crewman. His skin was bronze, his hair long, and he wore heavy pelts wrapped around his frame. They called him Patagon, a name that would come to label the entire region, Patagonia. To 16th century Europeans, this was the land of giants, and that's exactly how they portrayed it. Old journals, maps, and letters featured monstrous humans wielding massive spears, with wide feet and forms that looked as if they belonged to another age. The truth is, the native Tehuelche people were indeed tall, some standing over 1.80 meters, which, at a time when most European sailors barely reached 1.60 meters, seemed nearly mythical. They wore thick leather cloaks, wide boots, and carried themselves with dignity, but the stories exaggerated their proportions. In trying to describe the unknown, they had birthed legends, and those legends spread like wildfire. Soon it was said these giants were descendants of a forgotten race, exiles banished at the dawn of creation, doomed to live at the edge of the world. Others believed they were ancient guardians, survivors of a great flood, waiting silently for the end of days. Patagonia thus became more than just a distant place. It was a realm of extremes, where fire had a face and men became myths. The giants didn't speak. They simply watched. And for sailors daring to cross those icy waters, the greatest fear wasn't getting lost. It was being seen by something greater, something that might still be there, in the cold, in the silence, waiting. And many swore they saw them, not as superstition, but as omens. Because in that part of the world, it felt as though everything resisted life itself. Not everyone who came returned. Hidden rocks, thick fog, and sudden gales claimed many ships. The waters around the Strait of Magellan and the shores of Tierra del Fuego saw countless shipwrecks, some documented, many forgotten. One such vessel, the San Lesmes, vanished without a trace while attempting to navigate the southern coast. Other Spanish and English ships met the same fate, swallowed by the sea before ever touching land. The ocean in this region could turn treacherous in moments. Rogue waves rising from nowhere, currents snatching ships like dry leaves, ice forming overnight to trap those who slept. And it wasn't just the sea that claimed lives. The land was no safer. For those few who managed to reach shore after a wreck, they were greeted not by salvation, but by desolation. Endless plains, no villages, no shelters, no escape routes. Food would run out in days, drinkable water was rare, and the winds, always howling, tore away even the last threads of hope. survivors of wrecks told stories of madness brought on by the wind's relentless voice, of men who ventured off in search of rescue and were never seen again, of graves dug shallow into frozen soil marked only by stones, of eyes watching from afar, eyes not always human. Some spoke of fires burning on distant slopes, as if someone was observing from the shadows, as though the land itself had a pulse and resented their presence. To others, it wasn't just nature. It was resistance, a land that refused to be tamed, striking back in silence and with death. Here, compasses spun wildly, stars disappeared from the sky, and the heavens, even when clear, seemed to press down on the shoulders. In this realm, sailing wasn't a journey, it was a sentence. And death didn't only come from the waves. It walked on land too, slow, cold, and certain. Because here, at the end of the world, even salvation could become a curse. Far in the south, among mists, stone labyrinths, and storm-churned seas, sailors confronted far more than hunger and frost. They faced the unknown and left behind traces of fear, tales of fire, and footprints of giants. Today, the routes are mapped, the paths considered safe. But some stories still smolder in the land of fire, across the haunted strait, and in the vast, shadowed wilderness of Patagonia.